Every day, your City of Tempe staff goes above and beyond to make sure our community gets the best possible services and the most for our tax dollars. But how good is good? How do you measure it? And how do we know what we really need to make progress on some of our most pressing issues? To guide us, we developed a series of goals designed to help us improve our community based on our Tempe City Council's 5 strategic priorities. Reaching for excellence, we are comparing ourselves against the rest of the nation as well as ourselves. Some of our goals will help save lives. Some of them will help us save money. All of them will help us make Tempe a better place. Tempe Accelerates is an opportunity for you to get involved. Hear what city staff and community partners are doing to reach our goals. Your role? You are a vital part of our community. Share your ideas and help us craft better solutions. Ask questions. Be part of the conversation either in person or online. Check tempe.gov/Tempe Accelerates for dates and times of our next programs and collaborate with us at Tempe City Hall. Today, we will hyper-focus on 2 performance measures. Each presenting team will have 10 minutes to share data, strategies, and progress on a performance measure. Then, you will have about 10 minutes to ask questions or offer suggestions and ideas. On the back of your agenda, we have resource questions to help you participate in the conversation. Also included with your agenda is a quick survey with space you can use to include any ideas or suggestions you might have about today's topics. Thank you for participating. Now, let's accelerate.
All right, welcome everyone to Tempe Accelerates. Today we have 2 presenting teams, one on performance measure 3.31 regarding poverty rate and 4.09 housing inventory ratio. So let's go ahead and have the first presenting team come on up and we will get started.
All right, I'm Levon Lamy and I manage housing services for the City of Tempe. Today we're here to discuss one of the council priorities, specifically 4.09, but this really relates to the council priority for sustainable growth and development. What we're looking at is long-term generational investments in technology, infrastructure, and public transit that create safe, clean, equitable, and a healthy city. As it relates to 4.09, we're looking to achieve a housing inventory ratio for affordable, workforce, and market rate housing categories that meet the recommendations made for a 3-person household in the most recent study. Why does this matter? Well, first off, affordable housing is limited, not only on a national level, but on a local level, county level, pretty much anything you look at. We were reading some articles that came out of Sydney, Australia, talking about the affordable housing problems they're having there. So trying to identify, maintain, and preserve affordable housing is becoming a much larger issue all the way around. What does affordable housing mean? Affordable housing means spending no more than 30% of your gross income for your housing. Now, whether that's your mortgage payment or your rent payment, according to HUD, you should not spend more than 30% of that, or you're cost burdened. Access to affordable housing promotes a diverse and vibrant community by allowing folks the choices to live where they want to. Now, this is something that we've been working on since 2017. The slide that we have up now is what our Housing Attainability Index goal is. And what you'll notice is that our baseline that was established in 2017 shows that affordable housing, now this is all inventory in the City of Tempe, so this is ownership and rental. Affordable was available to 49.3%, workforce is 34.2%, and then market rate is 16.5%. All in, that's a fairly nice blend. What you're also going to notice is our goal is to maintain this ratio and to maintain a reasonable stock of affordable housing, reasonable stock of workforce housing, and a reasonable stock of market rate housing. Just maintaining that current ratio with all the development, is a pretty big project just by itself. Now, when it comes to affordability and that 49% that's available for lower income households, the key in this is that for the households earning between $0 and $31,000 a year, only 10% of the overall market in Tempe is available to those households. For 31 to 49,000, 39% of the overall inventory is available to those households. So a lot of where we are focusing, have been focusing, and most likely will continue to focus, is towards the lower end of the spectrum where they really need some supports in having housing choices. Workforce housing is 34% of the overall market at 49,000 to 76,000. When you get into the market rate housing, that's overall 17% of the overall market. Now, one of the things that we do have to take into consideration is, let's get these slides caught up with me here. One of these things that we have to take into consideration is 30% of your income is a different number for every single person, well, sitting in this room, frankly, and everyone else in town. When you're at a market rate income of $74,000 or $155,000 a year, nothing says you have to spend 30% of your income for where you live. You may choose to not live at your means and take a unit that's less expensive, which would then put you in the workforce category, to where you were utilizing a workforce unit. So when you are at the upper ends of the financial spectrum, you can afford everything underneath you. Lower ends of the spectrum, I mean, you can't afford things you just don't have the money for. As part of this, we've also been working with What Works Cities and GovActs. Excuse me, and this was a several-month project to where we were looking at what our strategies were, looking at some reasonably comparable cities. You know, Arizona has some pretty unique legislative restrictions on what we can do as it relates to creating and preserving housing. In looking at comparably sized cities with comparably sized universities, with reasonably comparable legislative environments, we were able to figure out that Denver, Durham, and Provo are about as close to the same as you're going to get. So looking at these benchmarks with other cities, obviously in other states across the country, where are they in relation to where we are, kind of gives us a good idea of what it looks like just across the board. Now, another thing that we've been working on is the affordable housing strategy. This is about an 85-page document that all in encompasses 20 individual strategies to preserve, create, or develop affordable housing. Of those affordable and workforce housing. Of those 20 individual strategies, 3 of them were prioritized because if we don't have that basic foundation in for the 3 prioritized strategies, none of the other 17 are even going to be able to get their wheels off the ground. So the first is, we have to identify a dedicated annual funding allocation to either the Affordable Housing Trust Fund or the affiliate of the Housing Authority. What that does is that provides guaranteed funding so that either as we're putting funds out to developers to incentivize them to develop workforce or affordable housing, or we're using it to purchase permanently affordable rental housing, we have a guaranteed dedicated stream of funding that we can count on to be able to leverage and move forward with every year. Item 2 is expanding the use of incentives. Now, incentives being fee waivers, reimbursements, abatements, you know, that's something that is mostly controlled through the Community Development Department, and there are some consultants that are coming on board here sooner rather than later to help really identify what's going to make the most sense as we're offering incentives to developers. Where does that equilibrium hit between what we're giving away and what we're getting from them? Third is the Affordable Housing Impact Statement. Now, the impact statement ultimately is an accounting mechanism. We know there are X number of houses in Tempe. We know there are X number of new developments coming in, and there are X number of units being torn down. It's administratively impossible and ridiculously expensive for us to try and go out and count every single house in the city every year to figure out how many units we have and what their affordability is. So what we're looking at is every 5 years we would do a full inventory of the city's housing stock. In the interim, as projects are running through community development, they fill out a little form that says they're either taking away or adding affordable or workforce housing. They give us a rough approximation of the number of units they think they're going to be removing or adding, so that we can at least maintain a reasonable idea of where we are that then would be trued up at the end of the 5-year period. And really, that is everything, unless there's questions. I'm sure there's
Thank you,
lots.
Levon. Questions from the audience? Over here.
Thank you, Levon, for that presentation. Have you ever tried measuring like the percentage of people or the number of people that are in workforce and buying affordable, or that are market rate and buying workforce, to gain, I guess, a perspective of how many people are under buying what they could, and how that would affect, I guess, the housing amounts, the number of houses below that?
It's a discussion we had with both sets of consultants, both BBC that did the housing inventory and BAE that did the affordable housing strategy. And while it sounds like it's a really simple thing to do, you honestly can't figure out how. In order for us to be able to figure out that you're buying a house below what you can afford, I kind of need your tax returns, and I'm going to need to look at your settlement statements, and most folks just aren't going to volunteer that information. So we just frankly have not been able to figure out how or where we would get the information to look at that.
This is a really amazing goal. It's incredibly important to have affordable housing. On a related note though, are there plans to look at how that housing is distributed geographically throughout the city? Like if we have concentrations of market rate housing in one area only, or that sort of thing?
Concentration of types of units, number one, is something that just naturally happens. Some areas are more expensive than others. Strictly from a housing authority perspective, we're very concerned with the concentration of poverty, and we're very concerned with the number of units that are available to lower income households in higher income zip codes and census tracts. We work on that as quite regularly, trying to help families either get in. If you're looking to buy a house and you're in a lower income, we will help you look in some of the higher income census tracts. But deconcentrating poverty is a very slow process to start with, and some of the basic realities that we have to function with. We're not going to be able to assist anyone to buy a house that costs over $271,000. That's the max for all of our HUD programs, which the new numbers are coming out, so that's going to change within the next month or so. But when you move into some of those higher income census tracts and zip codes, you're just not going to be able to find anything for under that spending cap. So we work on it quite a few ways. One of the things, incentivizing developers to include affordable or workforce housing does help to redistribute the affordable units throughout the census tracts and the zip codes, but it's a slow process that we just have to work on a little bit at a time.
How is sustainability involved in the initiatives? Are there, like, as far as environmental or sustainable development? When I was reading the BBC report, they were talking about things like tiny houses and stuff like that, and I was just wondering if there's any goals or plans on sustainable development for affordable housing.
Any affordable housing that we are putting forward or are putting out RFPs or RFQs to have developed, we are including some sustainability components to it. I mean, we were looking at one type of building that includes foam and reinforced concrete for the walls, which helps on quite a few things. However, when it comes down to basic pro formas, we're not in a financial position a lot of times to force too many of the sustainability initiatives through, just because when it comes to getting getting the financing and making our performance work is some of these technologies are still just too expensive for us to be able to put in and be able to rent or sell the unit at an affordable price. So we're getting there slowly but surely. But again, that's going to be something we just have to keep working towards. And as more people are, using 3D printing on some of the affordable housing, using more concrete construction, using more cinder block construction, as that becomes more of the norm, it gets more affordable, and we're able to more actively encourage developers to include that in what they're doing.
An idea just to help with accelerating it is coming up with what are the benefits for everyone, so you could possibly combat some of the naysayers, the not my backyard people. So those people may hear affordable housing, they think, oh, it's just going to lower my property value. If you actually show the real benefits to them, that might really help, move the effort forward.
Okay.
How does the concentration of affordable housing influence revitalization initiatives
Concentration
of
influencing
affordable housing?
the revitalization through just in general?
In general.
So as we're looking, so specifically from the Community Development Block Grant and Home Investment Partnership programs, the federal programs, as we're looking at where we're going to be putting dollars revitalizing neighborhoods, the census tracts in the neighborhoods with the highest concentrations of poverty are where we go first. You work through there, then you work your way to the neighborhoods that don't have such high levels of poverty. Excuse me. So that's not only for emergency repair, but that's if we needed to do major rehab, if we were going in and assisting a developer to do an apartment complex with the federal dollars. We significantly look at those increases in poverty and what that's going to look like, or if it's going to deconcentrate an area.
Any other questions? Sort of as a question to segue to the next presentation, when you look at it from your perspective, from a housing perspective, what portion, or should there be a thought about affordability of housing in terms of income growth among people who are otherwise living in poverty or in a situation where they can't afford market rate housing? Is what's the mix? In other words, if you're thinking about it in terms of affordability of housing, is it looking at building an affordable product more so than helping people achieve through education or through other means being able to actually afford the housing stock that's currently available?
That gets to be a little bit more of a difficult answer. Strictly from a housing perspective, we think everyone should be able to afford a place to live. But there are also realities. Some folks are, if we're looking at breaking the generational cycles of poverty, we definitely need to invest in education and social supports and support structures so that we can move the families out of these generational poverty situations. But then when you're looking at some of the folks that we already have, we have a rising population of seniors. We have baby boomers who are starting to age out. We've got folks with disabilities at all age groups. Depending on what your situation is, where you are is where you are, and you just may not be able to do anything different than what you're doing. In our programs, folks on Social Security, the average Social Security distribution is $735 a month. When you're 81 and you have an $8,000 a year income, we need the affordable housing developments to help you with where you are. When you're 18 and 19, hey, let's help you get into the community college and see if we can break this cycle of poverty.
That's an excellent point, and I guess the other point in listening to your presentation is for, in terms of the sorts of tools that HUD has for addressing people who are in poverty and housing, it's a little different for someone in that scenario versus someone who is more in the workforce category or has affordability gaps simply as a result of whatever, they may be gainfully employed but just simply can't afford to live in a certain market at a certain time. Right.
Which is, just not being able afford to live in one market is a completely different discussion than just not being able to afford to live
Sure.
at all.
Excellent. Anything else? Questions? Great job. Thank you, Levon. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, moving right along. The next team will come up and present on performance measure 3.31. Take it away.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. So our presentation is regarding poverty, partnering to lift the community out of poverty. I'm Octavia Harris. I'm the Executive Director of Tempe Community Council and the Deputy Human Services Director for Community Partnerships and Resources.
I'm Lauren Heyer. I'm the Human Services Manager with Community Supervision. Additional staff and partners for this performance measure include Marie Raymond, Tempe Human Services Manager of Education, Family, and Community Support, Sean Yunt, Senior Management Assistant, Tempe Human Services, all additional human services work groups, including housing, and the Southwest Collaborative on Immigration, Inequality, and Poverty at Arizona State University, led by Dr. David Becerra, Associate Professor in the ASU School of Social Work.
So this particular performance measure is under Strategic Priority 3, Quality of Life, enhancing the quality of life for all Tempe residents and workers through investment in neighborhoods, parks, the arts, human services, and city amenities with an emphasis on equity and diversity. Sorry about that. So this particular performance measure, 3.31, seeks to decrease the federal poverty level in Tempe. Federal poverty level is defined as who has access to federal assistance programs. The current poverty level in Tempe is 21.30%, and this is estimated by the United States Census Bureau American Community Survey. The federal poverty level correlates to the federal poverty guidelines, and these guidelines are a measure of income issued every year by the United States Department of Health and Human Services. Poverty guidelines are used to determine financial eligibility for households for federal programs like Head Start, which is early childhood education, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, commonly known as SNAP, and this is a food program that allows eligible households to purchase food, the National School Lunch Program, Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, or CHIP, and the Low Income Energy Assistance Program, also known as LIHEAP. The poverty guidelines are used in Arizona to also calculate eligibility for temporary assistance for needy families, also known as TANF. All of these programs are designed to be short-term support for families in need.
So why does this measure matter? Poverty is a complex and large topic. Growing inequality is detrimental to the economic growth and undermines social cohesion. The effect is also seen in education attainment, training, and proper health care. Poverty weakens communities due to economic isolation for those with low incomes. Purchasing power fuels local economies. If there are members of the Tempe community who are restricted from fully participating in the economy, it then results in lower revenues because of lower earnings. Individuals and households who experience poverty tend to have minimal contributions to the workforce or do not enter the workforce at all. Lower skill levels result in lower productivity. And then finally, the city of Tempe values people. The city recognizes the importance of personal and professional development.
Excuse me. So childhood poverty, according to the research report estimating the cost of childhood poverty in the United States, which is authored by McLaughlin and Rank and seen in the Social Work Research Journal, for every dollar spent on reducing childhood poverty, the United States saves approximately $7. These cost savings are seen in increased health, lower crime, and lower child homelessness. Children who live in families below the poverty line, even for short periods, are at greater risk of lower cognitive development, educational attainment, increased reliance on public benefits, and increased rates of incarceration. Consequently, children who grow up in poverty are more likely to have lower lifetime earnings due to the poverty-related risks. This means that children are far less likely to grow up to become positive contributors to our economy and our society. So here in Tempe, 75% of the children in Tempe Elementary School District qualify for free or reduced lunch, meaning that they and their families are below the current federal poverty level, and they are also included in the current Tempe poverty rate.
The current poverty rate in Maricopa County is 15%, and the current poverty rate in Tempe is 21.3%. This is a difference of 6.3%. Tempe strives to be the best in the region, and this should include reducing income inequality, inclusion, and opportunity attainment. So poverty is more than just economic poverty. It's also social and cultural. Poverty leads to growth inequality, undermines social cohesion, limits access to health and education, limits the right to maintain cultural identity and to be involved in a community's cultural life. Growth inequality occurs when there is a widening income gap between the lower middle class and poor households in comparison to the rest of the community. Social cohesion means that members of a community cooperate well with each other in order to survive and prosper. Social cohesion creates a sense of belonging, promotes trust, offers community members opportunities to attain positive community goals, and works against exclusion and marginalization. Poverty leads to increased physical and mental diseases, trauma, and lack of involvement in community cultural life. Cultural life is the application of the set of norms, beliefs, and traditions in a community. Current federally funded assistance does not appear to provide adequate levels of funding for Tempe community members to meet economic or other needs. The building of the system of human services in Tempe that includes Tempe Human Services, Tempe Community Council, and nonprofit partners seeks to provide supplemental support for community members.
So we've shared a lot about what poverty is. So what are our strategies? So we need to define and understand poverty in Tempe. We need to assess the causes of poverty in Tempe. An integrative literature review of the causes of poverty in communities, as well as an examination, meaning looking at the research and seeing what bears out to be true in this community, based upon evidence-based solutions for programs such as Bridges Out of Poverty and the Opportunity Atlas will be conducted. Other evidence-based solutions that are uncovered during this research phase will also be looked at. And this particular research will be conducted by ASU master's level social work interns, and this is through our partnership with SIP. In addition to these measurements, the issues of poverty were highlighted as a critical concern in the 2017 Tempe Community Council Community Needs Assessment, with several recommendations made for the populations of working poor and homeless. This includes seeking solutions to prevent homelessness and increase wages. An in-progress solution to assist those with low wages is the deployment of a partnership between Tempe Human Services and Maricopa County for a full-time workforce position that's based in Tempe with the purpose of assisting job seekers. So people who want to improve their job skills or improve their income through employment would be offered this assistance. The Housing Affordability Index measures median household income relative to the income needed to purchase a median-priced house in a community. So this was previously talked about during Levon's presentation, performance measurement 4.09. So affordable housing is defined as housing that does not require a household to spend more than 30% of gross monthly income on housing costs. So households that spend 30% of more are considered to be cost burden. This applies to owners as well as those who are renting. Currently, there's over 25,000 households that are cost burdened in Tempe. Affordable housing provides stability and increases opportunities for positive educational and health outcomes, along with lower crime rates. Next, we have the Comprehensive Affordability Index, which provides a view of affordability that includes both housing and transportation. Transportation is really important because it provides the opportunity to take into consideration the second largest household expense. And this comes right behind housing. Understanding this measure moves us closer to a clearer understanding of the causes of economic poverty in Tempe. And then next, the Equity in Action Innovation Project, which is currently underway. And this is led by Strategic Management Diversity. as well as neighborhood services and sustainability. And this is a really bold effort to intentionally bring underrepresented voices, including those identifying as low income, people of color, and individuals with English as a second language into city planning and decision-making processes. And then finally, we're going to continue to build on the existing performance measures that relate to performance measurement 3.31.
There are currently 15 performance measures that provide broad context for how Tempe is able to provide people support for reducing the effects of poverty. Just as poverty has dimensions beyond economics, the performance measures related to alleviating poverty are found in multiple strategic priorities beyond quality of life and include safe and secure communities. Examples of these are 3.05, achieve a housing choice voucher program optimization of either 98% of vouchers leased or 99% of available funding spent. And then 3.08, achieve a high school graduation rate of Tempe students who graduate in 4 years greater than or equal to the statewide goal of 90% by 2030.
So our challenges. Unemployment in Tempe is reportedly at 3.1%, and this is included under performance measure 5.13. And employment is a key indicator of economic health for a community. So we need to better understand the climate of employment for community members who are experiencing poverty in Tempe. For instance, is it low wages? Is it minimum wage jobs? Is it seasonal work? Additionally, we need to find answers to our wages supporting the cost of living in Tempe. So housing, transportation, healthcare, and food. So we really want to do a deep dive when we conduct research around these topics. And finally, this is really complex. There's no one-size-fits-all approach that can be taken for this particular complex social, economic, and cultural problem. This is intergenerational, as Levon mentioned, and requires some unique assistance within each generation and with each household, especially as many Tempe community members are living longer. Finally, on the face of things, we don't necessarily have to buy in on solutions to all of these problems. I'm sorry, we do need to have some buy-in on all of these problems and need to have an agreed upon understanding of poverty in Tempe in order to achieve this. So taking into account what happens nationally and regionally, we want to ensure that we have a local approach. And to do that, we have to have a local understanding of our particular problem. So finally, we would appreciate any ideas for acceleration.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Thanks for your presentation. With Tempe being at what we consider full employment, we have a very low unemployment rate, but we also have a wage gap in regards to gender. How are you combining those efforts in regards to what the city manager previously asked about, is increasing income?
So when we talked about having a workforce position that utilizes a partnership with Maricopa County to ensure that folks who want to or need the opportunity to increase their wages, that they can have someone to help them walk through that particular issue, because sometimes it's hard to sort of dig yourself out of that problem yourself. And if you don't understand whether it's your skills gap or if it's something else, sort of maybe your day-to-day stressors that keep you from being able to pursue those opportunities, if there's other sorts of help that you need, then that workforce position would help you uncover those. So that could be like resume building, that could also be interview, practice opportunities. It could also mean, do you need to pursue an educational opportunity? So something that's post-secondary, meaning after high school. So do you need to pursue a certificate or a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree?
I would like to suggest maybe we look at, from our office and the workforce development, how we can strengthen the resource of our salary negotiation classes, because that would be a skill set as well that you could bring into play. It's not just about getting the position, but it's also about asking for the right compensation for your skills and value.
Questions?
Thank you for that presentation. The question that I have is, what would you imagine would be the process someone would go through in order to, I guess, yeah, get out of being homeless or being off the streets? So, for instance, someone here in Tempe, someone is living on the streets. What's the process that they would go through, and I guess the resources that are available to them immediately? Because obviously, I would imagine that you can't plan long-term without meeting short-term needs, right? You can't talk about education when they're still living on the streets. So I don't know what your thoughts were on that.
So, I mean, actually, there are anecdotally, and that's one of the things we're going to dig into, students in our community who are homeless. And that's students who are in our K-12 system, as well as students who are pursuing post-secondary opportunities. So there are people that are actually pursuing education, but then for people who may not have the ability to sort of think to that next level of education attainment as an opportunity to get out of homelessness, there are several entry points. So one is within Human Services, there's a HOPE team. They conduct outreach, and they do so with nonprofit partners who are also there to reach a multitude of different populations. So whether you're what's considered a youth minor, or you're an actual youth by HUD's definition of being 18 to 24, 26, or you're an older adult, those teams are out and they're speaking with people. People have the opportunity to go to the City Human Services Department and actually seek help in that way. There's also a coordinated entry system, which is one of the most common ways for people to be able to seek that assistance. But I think that when people just aren't sure how to seek the assistance, that's why there's those outreach teams that are available. In addition to those outreach teams, there's also, in various areas, there's nonprofit partners where people can go into their office and say, I need some additional assistance. And they have reference and resource lists that refer people to the coordinated entry system. Temporary shelter is one of those short-term needs, and that's something that we have a lack of within Tempe. So figuring out how do we alleviate that lack of shelter in our community to meet those short-term needs, as well as those long-term needs, is something that we're looking into and that we're hoping to provide some actual feasible solutions to as well.
Another point of entry a lot of times is through the 911 system. So if an individual calls 911 themselves, or a community member calls 911, the Care 7 crisis team can engage with the fire department, police department, to ensure that there's immediate assistance provided to homeless individuals and families on the street. And then there are case management outreach services, like Octavia mentioned, with the homeless outreach team, and then the connection with the partners in the community. So a full continuum of services from immediate crisis all the way to getting somebody into stable housing.
Thank you for your presentation. I was recently reading an article, and I was talking about school hours and how they don't really coincide very well with the average worker's work schedule. And I was just wondering, are there programs available that are low cost or free for after-school programs so that adults can work? And a lot of times, it seems like low-income families have less flexibility, or perhaps leave time when things come up. Is that something that's available? I know that that there are some where you pay in with Kids Club or other programs, but any information on that?
So the city does have Kids Zone, which is now housed in the Human Services Department, a before and after school program. In the Education, Family, and Community Support Work Group, they also have free pre-K, which is supporting families being able to go to work when they have younger children. And then really outside of that, it's like Head Start, which is an early childhood initiative. So there are things in place. I think there are always barriers with cost, and I know that that's a discussion that is timely and relevant right now, even with City Council, and People are starting to get interested in how to make childcare more affordable, whether that's educational opportunities or things like daycare. So it's something that we have a lot of resources currently, but definitely have room to expand on.
So in addition to the programs that Lauren mentioned, in terms of subsidizing childcare, the Department of Economic Security does offer that assistance, but you do have to meet those income levels, and it's usually a fairly low income level. So partners like Tempe Community Council, we offer some support to a unique population, which is parenting teens, where we help to subsidize the cost of childcare. And that childcare does include those extended hours. So it would allow a parenting team to be able to work part-time or to take on some additional educational opportunities. But in terms of higher income, what we would consider sort of the workforce income, that is something that we need to find some solutions for, because it's difficult. We want childcare workers and teachers to be able to have a living wage, but at the same time, the cost of childcare can be difficult for those moderate to low income families too.
There is a gap between what like the Department of Economic Security will support and then people who still need assistance, like in the workforce bracket. So something that we are considering for sure.
Does the 21% number that we have in your presentation, does that include the student populations in Tempe? I know when I've looked at this in the past, those numbers tend to cause the city of Tempe's poverty rates to be higher because they are, their income is low because they're going to school and they have subsidy from other places like their parents or scholarships and things like that. Do you know?
It does. It actually does. And the reason why we're including that particular population within this total number is because there are some who are parenting who are also students, because the U.S. Census Bureau says, are you taking one class? If you're taking one class, then you're considered a student.
Okay. If those numbers were removed, let's say, where would we be below 15%, or would we be closer to the target number, I assume?
We would be closer to the target number. But again, if we're going to exclude certain folks from it, then we're not going to get a true picture of what the poverty looks like within our community.
True.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I'm just saying that the tools with which we would want to address poverty would be different if you're talking about someone who's, a full-time ASU student who looks like, to statistically to be in poverty, but they're really not because they have other means of support because they have chosen to go to school full-time and aren't working. I think for people who are full-time students, they are excluded from the employment statistics, aren't they?
They are.
So the Bureau of Labor excludes full-time students from looking at whether or not they're part of our unemployment statistics. There may be a value, I guess, at least in terms of, as we think about strategies for fighting this, our energies would probably be better directed towards those who meet the sort of criteria that you're talking about, as opposed to Tempe's, sort of disproportionately large student population who is, here for part of the year going to school. If that's a substantial percentage of the overall number.
I think it's important to note, again, about the partnership with the Southwest Collaborative on Immigration, Inequality, and Poverty, because I think that they are really interested in how populations like students affect overall poverty and where the strategies that we've developed will be applied, like what populations will we look at first. So I think that they're going to be really mindful and helpful in that effort. Yeah.
Exactly. As we get further and further down this, in looking at this measure and how to achieve it, those are the sorts of things I think would be very helpful to know exactly what populations we're addressing at which time and to tailor those tools accordingly. So, great. Any other questions for the presenters? All right. Excellent job. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Take a good look around you, because this is the last time we will be holding Tempe Accelerates here in the chambers in its current configuration. After the June 27th council meeting, the chambers will be closed for about 6 months. And during that time, chamber functions, including Tempe Accelerates, will be moved to our temporary facilities down at the Tempe History Museum at 809 East Southern. We will be taking some weeks off, and when we reconvene Tempe Accelerates, it'll be on August 27th, and it'll be from 2:30 to 3:30 at the Tempe History Museum. We certainly encourage members of the public to attend. If you can't attend in person, you can watch it on Tempe 11. If you can't watch it live, we do rebroadcast it. And again, if you weren't able to ask your questions or provide your feedback, please grab the forms in the back and write down comments to our presenting teams. I know they will appreciate it. Have a great summer, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Send us your ideas and suggestions to tempeaccelerates@tempe.gov and visit us at tempe.gov/tempeaccelerates.